Welcome to Psychological Explorations with Dr. Michael Axelman.
And Daniela?
And Joan.
Today we're going to be exploring Winnicott's paper, The Depressive Position in Normal Emotional Development. Winnicott puts forth in this paper and several others this idea of the development of the inner world. And he begins with this first stage referred to as the paranoid schizoid position. And this is very much in line with Klein and Kleinian perspectives, and involves getting the bad out that's internal through projection, and then utilizing these projections in the world through projective identification and over controlling these projections. And this also includes introjection of idealized objects. And this typically happens in the absence of these objects, that they get introjected as idealized. So in this stage, right, reality testing is very poor. Ogden put forth a paper in the early 80s where he posits an earlier stage than the paranoid schizoid position that he referred to as the autistic contiguous. And this is really the child in that stage in little bits and pieces that are completely unintegrated. And it's that stage is dominated by kind of sensory information, sensory perceptions that need to be integrated. The Winnicottian idea of the me, not me, is nowhere close to being sorted out because there is really no me yet at that time. Nothing that could be called a central aspect of the self. So that's the most primitive stage, but not one that Winnicott spoke about directly as a position. So from the paranoid schizoid, where it's defined by black and white thinking. You're in a very binary place, and the good and bad split. The depressive position involves this gradual ability to recognize and tolerate loss, accept one's guilt with capacity to make reparations, and to be in real world relations. It's through the depressive position that one gets anchored in reality more generally. And this emergent state, when one's not able to tolerate the feelings in the depressive position, there's the manic defense that we've spoken about in past presentations that involves the denial of loss, sadness, fragility is all denied, and the accent is placed on aliveness, activity, distraction, exuberance, the denial of depression and fragility. The depressive position in normal development is a developmental achievement. The child or adult who has reached that capacity for interpersonal relationships, which characterizes the toddler stage of health, has passed through and beyond the depressive position. On the other hand, the child or adult who is chiefly concerned with the innate problems of personality integration and with the initiation of a relationship with the environment is not yet at the depressive position in personal development. So still struggling with personality integration. Winnicott has a phrase that we come into the world in little bits and pieces, and all of these need to be found by the mother, mirrored, connected to, and it's through this process of being properly managed and cared for that these bits and pieces eventually come into wholeness, and this personality integration is achieved. Winnicott has this wonderful phrase called holding the situation. Learning to tolerate ambivalence is part of holding the situation. And the mother is the primary exemplar of this. And then the therapist kind of learns about this through kind of maternal acts and realizes this is what needs to be applied to the therapeutic context. The mother holds the situation and does so over and over again and at a critical time in the baby's life. The mother's technique enables the infant's coexisting love and hate to become sorted out and interrelated and gradually brought under control from within in a way that is healthy. Coexisting love and hate, a huge theme for Winnicott. And full love is not achieved without the full acknowledgement of hate that coexists with that. So the child is working through the first stages of the depressive position, and it involves integrating the first disappointment. The depressive position is an achievement that belongs to the weaning stage. And as such, the baby, we're presuming at this time, is wanting to continue to breastfeed, but is going through the disappointment that now you have to end. For whatever reason, the feeding has come to an end and you need to transition to the next stage of feeding, away from the breast or the bottle. To reach the depressive position, a baby must have become established as a whole person and to be related to whole persons as a whole person. If this wholeness cannot be taken for granted, then nothing I have to say about the depressive position is relevant. The infant just gets along without it, and many do. In fact, in schizoid types, there may be no significant depressive position achievement, and a magical recreation has to be exploited in default of what is described as reparation and restitution. So the idea that there's this distinction between me and not me that gets fully developed, that the not me is actually a whole person who has competing interests and agendas and is not just there to serve the child all the time and can be gone for a period of time. And the child misses that caretaker and wants that caretaker to return, thrusting the child into this place of loss and sadness, the disappointment that must be integrated. I miss mom. I I hope she comes back. I hope she's okay. And this emergence of what Winnicott called the stage of the concern. With the depressive position comes the capacity to care for somebody, to worry about somebody, to be concerned about somebody else. And that's the recognition of the other as a whole person that's separate and not under omnipotent control. And Winnicott, I quote, says the depressive position is a bad name for a normal process. My own suggestion was that it should be called the stage of concern. So there's this benign circle that develops. And it begins with the relationship between the infant and the mother and is complicated by instinctual experience. Okay. This idea of feeding, right, moving into a devouring. And there's this dim perception of an effect that the eating is kind of having an impact on the other in some way, and leaving a hole. Some kind of emptiness is left after the feed. And there's this inner working through, and the results of this have to be sorted out. These aspects of instinctual aggression and hate. So a capacity to give develops because of the sorting out of good and the bad within. And the child's able to move into this process, which is just beginning here, of guilt and reparation, of recognizing that sometimes they do too much and they do damage, and repair work needs to happen. And this is the same process that the mother goes through with the baby when they know that they have done some failure in some way and left the baby too long waiting. And then the baby chomps back, "Where have you been?" And the mother can recognize this communication that the child was asked to wait too long. The beginnings of relational communications. So depressive symptoms, difficulties prior to the depressive position and during the integration of the depressive position, can be quite different. Okay, the difficulties prior, they are more associated with depersonalization or hopelessness in respect to object relationships, or with a sense of futility that results from the development of a false self. So somebody who doesn't really feel like a person, they feel like they're going through the motions of being a person, but don't have that inner sense of aliveness, of a real self, of an integrated self, of wholeness within. Now we have with these symptoms that show up during the integration and after the integration of the depressive position that Winnicott in other papers has referred to as the most common symptom presentation that shows up at the clinic. And he referred to this presentation as common anxious restlessness, as the denial of depression. And this does not indicate the depressive position has been reached, but at this moment, the child is denying the depression. So it has been reached, but is now in denial, right? The common anxious restlessness is part of the manic defense, which keeps the child away from feeling the pain of the loss. Sally Short has this very interesting book here, focusing on the ruthless aspect of Winnicott. And Winnicott uses this idea of ruthlessness and pre-ruth, that even this stage before ruthlessness is even attained. So a little bit on this idea of eating up, of devouring, on being eaten and devoured, which is very much part of the infant toddler fantasies. And we hear them speak in that way of not just I'm going to eat you, right, but I'm going to eat you up, where the up is this word that kind of really speaks to the total devouring, the consumption, right? Taking something from the outside and bringing it inside. If and only if we have been eaten, worn down, stolen from, can we stand in a minor degree being also magically introjected and being placed in the preserve department of someone's inner world. And he's speaking directly here about this process of introjection that only happens, right, when you earn your stripes. You have to earn your stripes as a caretaker to be introjected into the child, for the child to call upon internally. This concludes our discussion of presenting Winnicott's paper, The Depressive Position in Normal Emotional Development. Please join us for part 2. Thank you.